I could see that a lot of other kids, to me at least, didn't feel that way. They didn't seem to be having that same experience. They seem to have more ease, you know? So I felt defective almost in who I was, as though there was a part of who I was supposed to be that was missing.
I'm Annemarie McQueen, journalist and proud 50-ish woman, and we are here looking for the true truth in perimenopause, menopause, midlife, and beyond.
Opening our minds to other possibilities is not always easy.
Hot flash ink.
You're all woman to me. All right, Annemarie.
Hi there. Today's going to be a little bit of a different podcast. I'm having a conversation with my friend, Skyler Liberty Rose, who I met online, but also was lucky enough to connect with in person in New York City. Skyler is a meditation teacher. She makes these great personalized meditations, and she's a pro-aging advocate, and she's also started doing ceremonies to mark things in our lives that maybe aren't normally marked. Skyler and I have talked behind the scenes about how we both feel that we are neurodivergent, and we've talked about how that's been difficult to come to terms with, also freeing. And so I wanted to have her on the podcast because I want to start talking about this a little bit more, but I, like everything else, I want to talk about it in a nuanced way. There's a lot of noise about people with ADHD and perimenopause. Perimenopause is the intersection of everything, and it is difficult to experience the realization that perhaps you carried this with you your whole life for a number of reasons. But I hope you enjoy our conversation and understand that it's not advice. There are no experts here. It's just two women speaking about something that is very close to their heart, a shared experience that maybe might resonate with you. And while I'm at it, I want to give a shout out to MenoLabs. They were one of the gold sponsors of my first ever Hot Flash Ink Summit, which is coming back this year. MenoLabs is here to support you in perimenopause with a range of science-backed products like their bestseller, MenoFit. This is a probiotic designed to help you get relief from perimenopause and menopause symptoms, including hot flashes and night sweats. It's all about that gut. Right now, they're offering our Hot Flash Ink listeners 20% off using code HOTFLASH20 at menolabs.com. That's code HOTFLASH20 at menolabs.com. Well, Skyler, it's really nice to see you again.
It's great to see you too.
Yeah, we had this beautiful afternoon almost 3 years ago in Bryant Park in New York City. And it was just one of I was just working out this afternoon. I was thinking about it. I was like, it's just one of those beautiful occasions that you just, in retrospect, just think about and think that was so amazing. And I'm so lucky to have met you. Yeah, I'm really glad that we met.
Thank you. And likewise, yeah, it was just a really affirming and enjoyable couple of hours we had there in sunny Bryant Park. So yeah, it was a great meetup.
We've had some Instagram DMs about this topic of, am I neurodivergent? What does that mean? What has that been like in this storm of information and conversation about being ADHD and perimenopause? And it's so loud and confusing. And, I want to ask you all about your experience because it's a really tender thing and it goes deep. And I think that gets lost in the people who don't know what they're talking about, basically. Tell me your story.
Well, I think of being neurodivergent as something that I always knew and something that I never knew. And what I mean by that is that as a child, I always felt a very clear sense of being other that was just something that I knew to be true. I didn't feel like I fit in with everybody else. There was this otherness about me, but I didn't really have any kind of language for that to help me make sense of it. I didn't have any knowledge or framework around it. So I was a very sensitive child and I tried really hard not to be. So I was emotionally sensitive, but I also had sensory sensitivity. So extreme sensitivity to noise, fluorescent lights were hard for me. I'd always be squinting. Crowds could be challenging sometimes, not always. Peripheral noise was challenging. I've always had real difficulty in filtering out, I guess, external stimuli. If there's a conversation happening peripherally, I'm really tuned into that as much as I'm tuned into the conversation happening in front of me. Sensitivity to smells, eye contact was a big one, especially if I'm the one speaking, because then I have to make eye contact and I have to think about what I'm saying. So that would sometimes trip me up, hard to focus on things. So all of that was happening. And I was the kid who buried herself in books, loved spending time with animals. I had this really rich imaginal world in my head. So I daydreamed a lot. I struggled to focus. My school reports often labeled me as easily distracted. And I struggled with numbers as well. I was moved down a maths class. Trying to think what else. It feels like there's so much that I really didn't put together at the time, but now I look back in hindsight and I'm like, oh, okay. Um, the biggest things I would say are that I didn't like noise and I didn't like unpredictability. I didn't like anything boisterous either. So sports were really hard for me. So I share all of this just to give you a sense of that otherness that I first described. This is very much how I felt. It's also true that I was very creative. I was very intuitive. I was very funny. I had a good sense of humor. But I I guess I had these strong qualities, but I didn't know how to lean into my strengths because it felt as though the rest of the world was focused on what I perceived to be, or the world perceived to be, as my weaknesses. And I could see that a lot of other kids, to me at least, didn't feel that way. They didn't seem to be having that same experience. They seemed to glide through the world in a way that just, they seemed to have more ease, you know? So I felt defective almost in who I was, as though there was a part of me, or there was a part of who I was supposed to be that was missing. And again, it's sort of easy, or easier now, to summarize these symptoms or traits or struggles, however we want to kind of, refer to them, easily now. But because I have awareness that I didn't have as a kid, which is that these are all things that make up the neurodivergent fabric of me. But as a child, I didn't have the language for that. And I didn't have the language for it as an adult either until really very recently. Something that I do want to share, because I think it's quite important to my story, is that in my late 20s, I discovered that I was an introvert. So this was through Myers-Briggs testing. So I was shown to be INFJ, to be precise, and it wasn't a happy revelation for me in any way, shape, or form, because the testing was done at the company that I worked for at the time. And I was an assistant to the deputy chairman, who was very extrovert. And he clearly thought that being introvert was a sign of weakness. So much so that after I'd had my assessment, he actually marched me back down to the boardroom where the assessor still sat, and said to him, "These results are wrong. Like, she's not an introvert. She can't be an introvert. The operations managers will eat her alive." And I didn't really have a good sense of, what an introvert was at that time, what an extrovert was. I just knew that I didn't seem to have the confidence he wanted me to have, and therefore this was a bad thing. Now, being introvert doesn't necessarily mean that you're neurodivergent, but I wanted to share this because it was my first kind of official diagnosis, as it were, of being or feeling other. And it did not feel like a relief. Like I say, it
Yeah.
felt like a burden. It felt like a problem, something I needed to fix. So the reason that it fits into my story is because I projected a lot and I masked a lot and I avoided a lot. So I created a life that didn't require too much of what was really hard for me. And wherever possible, I structured everything I could control, because the things I couldn't control just felt really overwhelming. Um, Alcohol helped me for a long time with all of that. Drinking made me feel as though it was easier to be that extrovert that I longed to naturally be. It lowered the sensory overwhelm, and of course it raised my courage. And it's not a healthy coping mechanism, obviously, but it got me through that time. But I'm glad I don't rely on that anymore. But it wasn't really until the last couple of years where being neurodivergent was suddenly on my radar a lot more. Um, and I started delving into it. I know we had a conversation in Bryant Park about ADHD specifically, and I was kind of like getting more curious at that time about whether I was somewhere I didn't really identify with everything or some of the things that came along with being ADHD, but with the sort of broader term of neurodivergent, I found that I was like, that's me, and that just increased. And yeah, all of this over the years, all of these different pieces kind of came together. And then with perimenopause, which I think of as this great unveiling, it's such an illuminating time. And I know that you know this, you've spoken about this so much. And the coping mechanisms that served us really well for years suddenly just don't work anymore. And I think it makes sense. It really makes sense because we have to adapt in perimenopause with exercise, with nutrition, alcohol, sleep. There's so much that we need to change about the way that we approach our health and our lives. So I guess it stands to reason that the practices that we might have had in place to support us and help us mask in areas where we were struggling, they also need to change during this great unveiling, greatly illuminating time. And when I say change, I really mean that the mask comes off completely. And that's really what it's felt like for me, that I'm removing a mask. And I think that's another reason why we often hear stories around why women's behavior, sometimes you'll hear people say, oh, she's behaving totally out of character when they're going through menopause and perimenopause. And I know there can be different things that contribute to that. But I do believe, and I think it's a really important distinction to make, that it's not our behavior that has fundamentally changed as much as our ability or even our interest in pretending to the world that it's business as usual. I know
Yeah.
that was a lot.
No, but as you were saying that, it's like for the neurodivergent stuff, there is so much more going on because you can't do the masking thing and all the things that went into it. Plus, it is quite a shock to like your executive functioning. I think I don't know about you in perimenopause, but I found I always worked full time, and then around 47, I lost my job, and it pretty quickly became a successful freelancer working like crazy because I always did. I could not get organized, and I feel like I have never been
Mm.
organized since. That was 8 years ago. Like I felt like that just coincided. Like I was so organized running a features department, but it was the only thing I had to do. Once I had all these other little things, and it was I feel like that was a moment where it blew off. But yeah, you're not able to like normal people, and I don't even know what that means. I just mean people who don't really understand what we're talking about. Um, everyone wears a mask to an extent, but
Right.
those coping mechanisms that have been in place for decades, like it's very, very painful not to be able to employ them and then to try and figure out
Yeah.
what to do.
Yeah. Because when they're taking away, you're literally left with like, well, if my coping mechanisms don't work, then I'm not coping. And I didn't know what to do with that.
Yeah.
It was very confronting. It was very destabilizing. And even though these mechanisms have been somewhat flimsy over the years, now they're not working at all. You feel so exposed, so vulnerable, and at the same time, you have all these hormonal shifts that are happening in your body. Your body's behaving differently. You literally don't know yourself. It's like greeting a stranger every morning, and
Yeah.
then the cloak of protection that you would have put around yourself previously is no longer working. And so you do feel, like I say, really exposed. I also stopped drinking at the time that all of this was happening, which was a great thing to do. And also, my crutch, one of my biggest crutches, had been taken away from me. So, yeah, it's like I say, I think of it as this great unveiling, and it is hugely illuminating. And now I can see the gift in that. But at the time, I wouldn't have been able to have this conversation at the time because I feel like I was just wild-eyed and what's going on, this feels really unsafe for me to be in my body right now.
That also I really identify with because I also used alcohol from the time I was about 16. I used to really like to binge drink. I wasn't like a
Yeah,
regular drinker. I wasn't like one of the 2, 3 glasses of wine at night. Because when I have a drink or two, I'm not good for anything. And I was always like, I got to get stuff done. But I liked to just go and get out of my head because my head was
right.
is just always was like, "Zzzz." And I used to even say it's like a vacation from myself. There's no other way to get a vacation from myself. And then my health blew open in my early
Mm.
50s and I could not drink. And I also, you know, it's just becoming increasingly apparent that you can't really, you can't really do it. Like your body's just not really into it. But that that year that I did not drink any alcohol, and I've never really gone back to it. Like it was, yeah, it felt like I had no skin. It was so incredibly difficult. It was so incredibly difficult. And you did it before, I remember, and I remember thinking about, and it's not like you're an alcoholic quitting drinking. It's such an interesting thing, right? Because it's like you're not an addict, but it was still incredibly
Right.
difficult to be not drinking. It wasn't hard. It
Yeah.
wasn't hard for me not to drink. Do you know what I mean? Like that wasn't really hard. It wasn't like I was jonesing for
Mm.
alcohol, but it was hard not to have something to grab at to sort of like,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, that was
Yeah.
a lot.
It's just, yeah, like I think that crutch, that prop part is really significant because these are things that are our go-tos. And like you, I wasn't drinking every night, but I would absolutely drink in all than every social
Yeah.
situation that I was in because I didn't really know how to be myself and how to manage a social situation without that crutch. And so it's still it's still something that I'm mindful of. If I, get invited to certain things, I'm like, oh God, it's going to be, people are going to be drinking and the noise will go up. And the biggest thing for me is like, I'm not going to be able to hear because I can't tune out that peripheral noise and I
Yeah.
can't focus on a one-on-one conversation like without struggling. So yeah, I choose my events wisely, shall we say.
Do you like the one-on-one conversations better?
I do. And I mean, I actually really enjoy being in groups and I run groups. And that's been interesting for me and quite a revelation as an introvert to find out. I think once I was able to accept that I was an introvert, because that in itself was a process. I thought, well, gosh, I can only deal with one-on-one things then because that's apparently all introverts can do. And that's not true for me. I really enjoy being in groups. I was just doing a ceremony for someone at the weekend, and it was, in a room full of people. And I'm there at the front with the microphone, and I feel completely at ease, completely at home. But for me, it's much more about the setting that I'm in versus the amount of people.
Yeah.
If it's conducive to being kind of quiet and I don't know, just like there's got to be a certain vibe in the room, I
Yeah.
think, where it's not like this whole sensory overload. And I really enjoy group energy. So yeah, one-on-ones are amazing, but so are groups if it feels like it's with people who get me. And they don't have to be neurodivergent, but just that there's a shared understanding in the room that, we're not going to start like letting off like fireworks here or
Yeah.
going crazy with noise. So yeah.
Or no scent machines. This whole Middle East is just filled with scent machines. Like I'll go somewhere and then I just spot it in the corner. It just does me in. It just absolutely
Yeah.
does me in. It's so overwhelming. I was just up in
Yeah.
the gym today and there were two girls. Everyone wears a lot of perfume and cologne. I mean, they probably do in
Right.
North America too. I just haven't been there in a while. And I was just like, woof, this is a
Yeah.
lot. Yeah, and I would never like these were all things that I didn't know. Like you don't know them, right? Like you're remembering them,
Exactly.
but you
Yes.
don't, I don't know. Did you do like I did a lot of like what's wrong with me? Like why can't I handle the things that other people seem to handle?
Yeah,
why am I not enjoying the things that other people seem to enjoy? I guess that's that sense of other that you can't really put a finger on. So has it been a relief for you,
exactly.
would you say?
Yes.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, that's literally the word that always comes to mind, which was a different experience than I had from when I, like I say, got that kind of revelation that I was introvert. That felt like a label I really didn't want to
Mm.
accept. I wanted to reject it, and I felt like I had to overcome it. Neurodivergent, however, it feels like, God, it feels like being held in a way that I've never been held before, and being understood in a way that I've never been understood before. And even, by myself, to myself, it's like, oh, I think labels can sometimes be, I don't know, feel restrictive, and we don't always like the idea of being labeled. But I think labels can actually be a really good thing as well if we feel like that helps us, have that sense of sort of visibility and acknowledgement that we haven't had before. And for me, being neurodivergent gives me something that feels really supportive and reassuring, and it helps me make sense of my own experience. So I now I'm like, gosh, this is actually a gift to have this awareness, whereas before I definitely wouldn't have approached it that way.
Yeah, as labels go, it's pretty lovely when you think about it. Like it makes me feel good too. It's, it's like expansive.
Yeah,
Okay, so
yeah.
have you gone and had formal diagnosis?
I have not. And that in itself prevented me from speaking openly about
Yeah.
being neurodivergent, because I didn't believe that you could. I was like, well, you can't say that unless someone's told you that you are,
Right.
didn't occur to me that, well, I know all of this, like I think I said to you on one of my DMs, like, this is a bones deep knowing. This is, to me, absolutely indisputable. But I was really holding back on sharing that. And it was only literally at the end of last year that I actually wove it into my website copy. I've long since shared that I'm an introvert, but I was like, oh, actually, I now know that I can fully stand behind this statement and
Yeah.
share this about myself. And this will hopefully help other people who find their way to me. Um, I'm not ruling out getting an official diagnosis, as it were. I mean, I I can almost see that at some point I will. The things that are stopping me at the moment are, I'd say the biggest thing is that I spent most of my life seeking external validation. And it has been such a joy, such a deep joy to arrive at a place where I don't feel that I need to do that anymore. And there's a part of me that, yes, I can go through this testing and it will be expensive. And I also want to find somebody who understands how to look at the experience of a midlife woman and not just use testing that I believe, and I'm not sure about this, so it's not something I'll be quoted on, but I believe that a lot of the criteria was centered around young boys and men. And we know that when it comes to women's health, we're largely left out of the equation when it comes to research. So that seems like it could be something that's true. So I'd want to be tested by somebody who I believed would be able to, really look at the broader picture. Um, but that external validation piece just doesn't feel like something I'm seeking in my life right now, because it kind of goes against the grain of all the other work that I've done and that I continue to do on myself and the ways that I support myself. I don't know what discernible value that would make in my life to have a piece of paper or you know, official, you know, diagnosis that tells me what I already know to be true about myself. So I think for people who are considering getting a diagnosis, I just fully encourage people to do what feels right and aligned for them. And if you do feel the same way that I do, that we do, not to say that we're having identical experiences here or to assume anything about your experience, Anne-Marie, but um, I think don't let a diagnosis or lack of stop you from supporting yourself in the ways that you most need and would most benefit from. Don't stop yourself from accessing tools that feel like, they're going to help sustain you and give you a quality of life that you might have been perhaps denying yourself before. So yes, it may be something I do in the future. It's not something I'm pursuing right now.
Well, I think it's so interesting. We have very similar experiences. And one thing, when you're speaking, you're saying you didn't want to speak about it because you didn't have the diagnosis. I felt exactly the same way. And I thought, as I was on my path to needing less and less external validation, I thought I'll get the diagnosis and then I can talk about it and then people will believe me.
Exactly.
And then you get to a point where you're like, for me, it was, I worked at this museum for 18 months and met this beautiful woman who, this museum here in the UAE, it's very progressive. They have a full, calm room, and there's a whole department devoted to making visitors to the museum comfortable. And the woman who ran it, she has a special needs brother. She's just beautiful. And I edited the accessibility policy. And I had been burbling around in my mind that I maybe had ADHD, but when I edited this policy and it talked about all the sensory stuff, I was like, this is me. Like, I was having a very I worked on this thing for several days in a row, and it was a huge experience. And I just kept it to myself. But then one day I said something to her about it, and she said, I said, listen, when I edited that, I was realizing it was me. And she said, you have made my day. Like, you have made my day. She just took it. Because I had tried to sort of say something to some friends, and people don't receive it well, except someone I'd known for a long time who said, I think you have ADHD. She was diagnosed when she was a teenager. But having this woman here, and then we had a training day, and she talked about the adults who are realizing this either through diagnosis or through their lived experience. And I just felt like all of those things just made me realize, as the need for external validation is going away, I don't know what to say. I don't really need something to talk about it, like some sort of degree. And
Right.
the training the testing is very expensive. It's confusing over here. I can't quite get to the bottom of what I need to do. I've booked it a couple times, canceled it. And I read the Australian comedian and actress, her book, Em Rusciano, her book Blood, Sweat, and Glitter, and it's all about her life realizing this stuff. And she said if there was ever a test that is not suited to someone who's neurodivergent, it's the diagnosis process. She said it's terrible. And so, I don't know. I just think it's interesting. But can you talk a little bit about how other people receive it?
I am, up until now, this is the first time that I'm really, going on a platform where I'm like, hey, this is what's true for me. I've been quite discerning about who I've shared the information with, because it's really draining to have to try to convince people that something that you know to be true about yourself is true about yourself. And as we have spoken about previously, people who may come from a well-intentioned place can say things like, oh, but we all have a little bit of that, or this is true for everybody. We all struggle with I don't know, like some last minute changes to things, or some of the sensory stuff that we've mentioned.
Overwhelmed.
And
We can't.
right. Yeah. And that can be true. Like my husband, for example, and he can be, if we're at a movie theater or something, he might be annoyed if there's people talking, whilst we're watching the show. He doesn't so I don't think he's neurodivergent. He doesn't think he's neurodivergent, but he may have experience of some of the things that make up the neurodivergent fabric of me. So it's a different experience. You're not walking through life with this kind of continual overwhelm, I would say, in like the normal world, as it were. So for that reason, because I think it's still quite deeply misunderstood by those who haven't really had an experience of it, I am mindful about who I share the information with, because I don't really think that it's helpful for me to put myself through the agony of one of those conversations. And the people that I do share it with, I are pretty, in fact, everyone has been, including my husband, overwhelmingly supportive and understanding and unsurprised. That's the other thing. I haven't had anyone go, really? It's kind of like, I don't know, it's like a coming out of sorts. And I don't know if that's an appropriate analogy, and not to cause offense to anyone, but it's kind of like maybe a coming out, and people are like, we kind of knew that.
Yeah.
And you think you're like sharing something that's this new information, but other people who have been in your life and seen you and understand you are kind of like, hi, yeah, that makes sense. Like I see
Yeah.
that about you.
Yeah. That's awesome. I realized for sure my mom also was almost the same as me because she deeply
Right.
understood. She deeply understood. Like I remember multiple times being in a mall and having to take me to get like to take me out and go get a Coke. We would always go get a Coke. But I remember she would just look at me and I guess I was supposed to be having fun because I'm shopping with my mom in the mall. And I just would get like a complete, and she used to call it a sensory storm. She would say it was a sensory storm. And
Wow.
I remember seeing, she would just get this wiped look, just wiped. I remember a dinner at university. My parents and my roommate's parents, we went out for dinner, and it wasn't a group that melded all that well. It was sort of like an exhausting night. And there's a picture of her as the bill's coming, and she just looks like she's been through some sort of like giant event, her whole face. And I think about it all the time. I wish I could talk to her about it. I know she was just like me, and she had all this verbiage for it. So
Right.
that has been something that I've slowly realized too. Yeah, but it sure is a great time for all this stuff to happen because, like, what a time. Yes, of course. I mean, social media is just full of people who don't understand this feelings and situation that another person is going through, right? Like, there's a lot of that happening now with arguments over Ozempic and food noise and people saying, fit people saying, well, I like to eat too. And, and then there's people saying, no, it's literally all they've thought about since I was 16 is eating.
Right.
It's just sort of an epidemic of people not being able to realize that not everyone has the same experience as they do inside their head.
Yeah.
So it really matters. Yeah, it really matters less and less. And yeah, I think it's an incredible journey. And it's also like, what are some of your sort of superpowers, you would say?
Oh, and I don't know, whether to attribute this to being neurodivergent or introvert or I don't know. But I love how intuitive I am. I really trust my intuition now in ways that I maybe didn't used to. I have a lot of empathy. I think because I live in the gray spaces more often than anything else, I I am able to recognize nuance, and I understand that there are multiple layers to every experience and there are multitudes to every human. And so this drag and drop idea that we have of we like to, society generally likes to categorize us, and I think that's why we see so much of this kind of polarizing stuff on social media, because it's like, well, I've got to be in this camp or this camp, and I can't say, well, I kind of feel like a little bit of this and maybe some of that, and yeah, a bit of that over there makes sense. The world doesn't like that. It's just like, pick a lane, stick to it. And so in my work especially, I've been able to show up in a way where I really am able to meet people in the space that they're in, because I recognize that that space is very individual and nuanced and layered, and I'm not asking them to fit a version of themselves that they just don't relate to or identify with. So yeah, I do think sensitivity is a superpower. And it's taken me so long to embrace that, and it's not always easy. Sometimes some days it's a gift that I kind of am like, I could just maybe
Yeah.
not
I
have
could give
this
it back.
today.
Yeah, give it back.
Yeah, but I don't know who I am without it, and I guess I'll probably never know, because this is part of the makeup of me, and I work with it now and I embrace it, and I help other people do the very same thing. So that feels like a really special and unique place to be in.
It is a special and unique place, and it's what we need to change the world and to get through where we are now into a better place.
Mm.
We are both lovers of nuance and gray areas, so I appreciate you. And why don't you tell everyone what it is you do offer, because it's really special.
Thank you. So, my work is all about helping women in midlife and beyond to embrace aging with passion, with purpose, with confidence. And I do that through personalized guided meditations, which are my signature elevations. and also customized ceremonies, which are threshold rituals for life transitions, of which in midlife and beyond we are having many of. So, yeah, it's really about helping women to have tangible results in their life, to own their own aging evolution outside of a culture of anti-aging, which is full of ageist narratives and stereotypes that do not serve us. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, I hope to have you back to
Thank you.
speak about your work, more about that work, because I think that is also so important. It's sort of getting lost in
Thank you.
everything, and this is, yeah. There's so many ways to talk about it, but thank you for speaking to me about this, because I know it's sort of raw and new, and we need people to speak about it in all different ways. So I'm going to be addressing it more on the podcast with professional, like with experts and with other people who are going through it. But I just wanted to sort of tiptoe in. I've talked about it a little bit on here, and then I wanted to talk to you, and just if anyone resonates, starts thinking maybe.
Well, thank you for, as always, and I've said this to you before, but for creating spaces that actually do hold space for the nuance, for the different experiences that people are having, because I see so few spaces that truly reflect that. And I think your interest in getting to the truth, but also recognizing that multiple truths can and do coexist in many areas, it makes it accessible for people, because so often we're looking at the rest of the world thinking, like I said, I don't fit into that space, or that space, or this isn't true for me, but that might be. And so it's really refreshing to come across someone whose work is all about, like I say, kind of finding the truth and sharing it, but also recognizing it's just not a black and white world that we live in, and there really is so much nuance to everything.
Yeah, my new hobby is just thinking of a topic and thinking I think I know about it, and then researching it, being like, oh, okay,
I know nothing.
I know nothing. I only know what I don't know, which is everything. Okay, thank you
But
so
even
much.
that is amazing.
Yeah,
It's enjoyable. Like, let's just enjoy the journey of discovery, which
yeah,
if
perpetually
anything,
curious.
perimenopause and menopause is all
Yeah,
about that.
yeah. Thanks, Skyler.
Thank you, Anne-Marie.
Hot Flash Inc. was created and is hosted by Annemarie McQueen, produced and edited by Sonia Mack. The information contained in this podcast is intended for informational purposes only and is not intended for the purpose of diagnosing, treating, curing, or preventing any disease. Before using any products referenced on the podcast, consult with your healthcare provider, read all labels, and heed all directions and cautions that accompany the products. Information received through the podcast should not be used in place of a consultation or advice from a healthcare provider. If you suspect you have a medical problem, i.e. menopause or anything else, or any healthcare questions, please promptly see your healthcare provider. This podcast, including Annemarie McQueen and any producers or editors, disclaim any responsibility from any possible adverse effects from the use of any information contained herein. Opinions of guests on this podcast are their own, and the podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about a guest's qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements and advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. This podcast is owned by Hot Flash Inc. Media.